Ladies and gentlemen of the world, welcome to my channel, although if you're already familiar with my channel then welcome back. My name is Zach Jones, although a lot of you probably remember who I am. I'm redoing this PowerPoint, but today I'm going to talk about the natural world and why we need to protect it. Some of you may know that I have been passionate, fascinated and bordering on obsessed with the natural world, but mainly birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, sharks and even extinct animals ever since I was a boy. But over the last few years I've also been taking more of an interest in insects and invertebrates. But unfortunately, not everyone shares my passion for the natural world or want to do anything to protect it. That is why I'm back here. Because now, more than ever, we need to learn from our mistakes in the past with the natural world, and we need to protect it. I will be telling you all about these animals from Africa and Asia, which is where the wildlife is most at risk. But also, I will be using animals that went extinct in the past because of human beings as examples for why we need to learn from the past. Right then, I will start with Africa. The first animal is forest elephants. Now, forest elephants are, well, they may look like the elephants you see across Africa, but they are their own separate species. They're smaller in stature, they live in smaller herds, and also they have straighter tusks. But also, what they lack in stature to their savannah cousins, they make up for it with a very fierce and fiery temper. And that is mainly down to humans, because elephants all over Africa are being poached at a horrifying rate. In fact, forest elephants are probably the most poached, and it's all for these, for their tusks. Now, elephant tusks are made of a substance called ivory. Ivory is, of course, it's a banned substance in many parts of the world, but there are still people who want it, like China, Vietnam, Taiwan, and the Middle East. Of course, elephant ivory is used to make Arabian dagger hilts, jewellery, necklaces, ornaments, trinkets, but also in China, elephant ivory is now in a demand for chopsticks. And well, forest elephants are the most heavily targeted by poachers because their tusks are made of a denser ivory that's easier to carve, and also it has a rosy pink hue to it, which is even more in demand from ivory carvers. And every day as many as 7 to 8 elephants are killed, but every year as many as 10,000 elephants are slaughtered for their tusks. And that's not just bad news for the elephants, but it's also bad news for the habitat they live in, because elephants are habitat formers, especially in like the Congo rainforest or in the forests and jungles of Central and Western Africa, where forest elephants live. And how they're habitat formers is they take out the smallest saplings and leave big open spaces for other trees to grow. And they form the paths that we humans and other animals walk on. And of course, another thing is about elephants is that their droppings can carry the seeds of the fruits and the plants that they eat. Because basically, you're like when you see elephant dung, I mean, it looks gross, but it isn't, because the plant vegetation passes through the stomach virtually unchanged, and they can't digest plant wall cellulose. Cows can do it, elephants can't, and that's quite often why they have to feed for 16 hours a day. And of course their droppings quite often contain the fruits, well, the fruits and plant seeds from what they eat, and that helps the forest grow. But also, elephants take a long time to mature and reproduce, because elephants have probably the longest pregnancy of any mammal, because it can be 22 months, and they live for well over 60 years, and they take a long time to mature and reproduce. And if this carries on, if the poaching carries on, then elephants will, in my lifetime, go completely extinct in the wild, and that for me is an absolutely heartbreaking thing. But, I mean, there are people working to protect elephants in their habitats, and with the anti-poaching squads, but I will get to them later. Now, the next animals I'm going to show you are probably the most well-known animals that are affected by poaching. It is the rhinos. To be precise, the black and white rhino. Now, rhinos are found throughout Africa and Asia, and they come in all different shapes and sizes, but they all share horns. But of course, the white rhino and the black rhino are very different. So, in fact, it's not down to their colour. I mean, it's because my mum spent a large part of her childhood in Africa, and she actually told me that the name the black and white rhino was actually a mistranslation by Europeans. And how you tell the black and white rhino apart is you look at the mouth. On a white rhino here, it has a very flat mouth because it's a grazer, so it feeds on grass. But the black rhino here has a beak-shaped mouth because it's a browser, so it feeds on low shrubs and trees. And in fact, that animal can actually snap off branches as thick around as my arm. But also, the white rhino is the most sociable of the rhino, and is usually found in medium-sized herd groups. But every species of rhino that's found in Africa and Asia is now in terrible trouble. And it's all for these, their horns. Now, rhino horn is not made of bone or ivory. Rhino horn is actually made of a substance called keratin. It's the same substance that our fingernails and our hair are made of. But, unfortunately, many people like China, Vietnam, Taiwan, North Korea and the Middle East believe that rhino horn has medicinal purposes, when that's absolutely idiotic. And there is no scientific proof that it works. And as my mum pointed out, if keratin had medicinal purposes, you just have to chew on your fingernails. But regardless, rhino horn is not only used for medicines, it's also used for Arabian dagger hilts, like the elephant tusks, but it's also sold in Chinese and Vietnamese markets as trinkets or ornaments, or even ground up and served in drinks. And believe it or not, rhino horn can actually fetch about $60,000 US per kilo. And because of that, these animals are being absolutely plundered by poachers who chase them down with AK-47, with helicopters, shoot them with AK-47 machine guns, and hack off their horns with chainsaws. And it's not just the adult rhinos that are affected, quite often they're calves, because it's usually mothers with calves that are affected the most, as when their mothers are killed for their horns, the rhino calves, whose horns haven't even grown yet, are just left out in the wild to die. And a rhino calf out in the wild would be an easy meal for lions, hyenas, jackals or wild dogs. I mean, there is hope, for rhinos across Africa with armed patrols and anti-poaching squads. Of course, there's already been one species of rhino that has now been classed as extinct, and it's the northern white rhino, because the only two left are female and they can't reproduce with each other, so they've now been classed as extinct because the only two left are female. And of course, believe it or not, in the 1960s, the populations of southern white rhino dropped to as many as 30 animals left. But what followed was one of the greatest conservation success stories in the world, and now the southern white rhino is no longer endangered, but it is still vulnerable, and the black rhino, unfortunately, is critically endangered and teetering on the edge. And of course, quite often, poachers tend to forget that rhinos, while they don't have very good vision, they do have a very good sense of smell and hearing and a very bad temper. And they will charge at anything that surprises them, even humans. And of course, as I mentioned, with rhinos being protected, there are people working to protect them with armed patrols and anti-poaching squads, and also people taking in calves that have been orphaned, but that can be quite a dangerous job, as poachers are heavily armed, they're well organised, and they're very dangerous. Yeah, and the next animal I'm going to show you all is probably the most trafficked animal on the planet. It is the pangolin. Now, I know what you're all probably thinking. The pangolin must be like some kind of dinosaur, right? But actually, it's not a reptile. It's actually a mammal. It is in the same group as armadillos, aardvarks, and anteaters, but they're also the only mammal to be completely covered in scales, and those scales are made of keratin, like our fingernails. And pangolins are found throughout Africa and Asia, and the reason why they're covered in scales is down to what they feed on, because pangolins are ant and termite terminators. What I mean by that is that pangolins will feed on ants and termites, and a lot of them can have very, very vicious bites and stings. And so pangolins have enormous claws for breaking into termite mounds that can be set as hard as concrete, and they're covered in scales to protect them from the bites and stings of their prey. But unfortunately, every species of pangolin that's found throughout Africa and Asia is in trouble. And pangolins have now become the most trafficked animal on the planet. And that's all down to the fact that their scales, like rhino horn, are believed to have medicinal purposes, which is absolutely idiotic. But also, pangolin meat is seen as a delicacy in Asia. And the reason why pangolins are so easy to catch is down to their defence mechanism, which is here to roll themselves up into a tight ball to protect their soft underside, and that just makes it easier for poachers to just pick them up, put them in a sack and carry them off. And if it carries on like this, then pangolins are going to go extinct in the wild, and that will throw nature out of balance, because the populations of ants and termites will just get completely out of hand. And to me, that is heartbreaking. But I mean, like with the rhino and the elephants, there are people working to do something about it, but I'll get to them later. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you is some of the most important, but also vastly misunderstood of all creatures. It is the vulture. Now, vultures are found, these ones are found in Africa and Asia, and they aren't many people's image of a cute animal. I mean, because they are a bit grim looking, like with the head and the neck completely bald of feathers, but that's all down to the fact that these animals are scavengers, which, if you think about it, are basically just predators going about getting their meals the easy way. But also, vultures, to me, well, they don't look very pleasant to other people. I personally think that they are gorgeous. And they are also some of the most important of all creatures, because vultures are called the undertakers of the bush, and that's mainly down to the fact that when an animal dies, the vultures consume the carcass, and that prevents the spread of diseases like Ebola, botulism, tuberculosis and malaria. And they have some of the best eyesight of any animal, and their eyesight is said to be 8 times more powerful than ours. so they can spot a dead or dying animal from miles out.